I don't know how familiar you are with this, but I've seen enough videos of babies crying, of dogs barking, of doors slamming in the last couple of months. So that I see we're up to, really, we're getting to 20 people, which is very, very nice. Here's 21. And I'm going to wait one more minute and then start. So, and we're already recording. Okay. Yes, people are coming in, and we're a nice quorum. So, good afternoon to you all. My name is Jay Hurowitz. I'm from, among other things, the Moffett Institute. It's my pleasure to be the, what's the right word, the moderator for this particular session, which is devoted to, well, it's devoted to academic writing, of course, but the subject is, I wrote it down to myself, and that's what I didn't write down, so I apologize. Let me find that for a second, and I will tell you exactly. We are dealing with textual characteristics of academic papers, which is quite a topic. We have two presentations today. The first is, does it always follow function? Developing forms of connectivity in academic writing. I like form following function, so I'm glad to be hosting this. Presenting will be Alyssa Rosado, whose research is together with Irineo Ferra, both of them from the University of Barcelona, and Melina Aparici, I hope I got that right, from the Universitat Autonoma of Barcelona. Is that the Open University, or is that something different? It's different. Okay. Well, I've learned something new, and I look forward to hearing with the presentation from Alyssa other new things. So, Alyssa, you may take the screen you have now. Our presenters have 15 minutes each, and after that, we will move into the question-answer period, which will be 10 minutes together for what will happen. Please.
Oh, thank you very much, Jay. Shalom, everybody. Hello. I'll try to stick to the time. I'll do my best. I may spoil this for you because the final result is that it doesn't necessarily always follow function, but we'll see about that. We're actually, what we're actually discussing today, the starting point of our research, of the study we share with you today, is that is the study of academic writing from a developmental perspective. I mean, we've been working on from that perspective quite a long time now. And what we do is assume that the development of writing skills implies progressive mastery of specific advanced forms and function. We are discussing analytical writing, and we are aware of how big this umbrella term is and what's under it. But we're specifically mostly talking about expository argumentative writing. Okay, I'll be pleased to discuss that later on if you feel like it. And we assume, as you probably do too, that is key for academic and professional success, and that's a very it's a crucial starting point, right? So what we're considering today is the development of this analytical text, this analytical writing, in the context of secondary and higher education, as far as the organization of information, but particularly the use of formal resources to connect pieces of information is concerned. And we assume, because we have found that in previous literature, we're aware that the use of these resources is a predictor of the quality of the text. I won't go into that in detail, but surprisingly, and you'll see that in a moment, we found out that although it's typically a developmental feature, it's not necessarily directly so easily or straightforwardly affected by pedagogical work. We'll comment on that later. And I'm sure you will be familiar with this problem. I'm moving us all here so that we can read everything. When assessing text production, in form and content, we as teachers, not only as researchers, but also as teachers, we cooperate with our students and evaluate many times what they say, because that's what we want to evaluate, but leaving aside how they say it when it comes to content, right? And the paradox, and it's based on what Pinker says about our hunger of coherence, our hunger of understanding. This paradox is related to how good we are in interpreting what's not there, in cooperating with our students to make sense of their texts, but we're not so merciful, we're not so understanding when it comes to grade the text, when it comes to marking those texts, right? And we know that this is a common problem in our context, in the Catalan educational context, but we're prepared to assume that it's general and it doesn't only affect us. Right. So with this starting point, we a couple of years ago now, well, we developed, we presented this project in order to analyze the form and the content of the texts by Catalan students, secondary school and university students, and with a double goal. The first one, which is the one we're discussing here today, is a psycholinguistic one. We try to characterize analytical writing, like from a very descriptive psycholinguistic point of view. Yet the second goal, which is not the one we're discussing today, I'm sorry to move you all around all the time, it's a pedagogical one. I mean, our purpose was to develop a valid instrument, a useful instrument to be able to analyze the production of these students in different disciplines, in different contexts, in different levels, right? So, but still, as I said, we concentrate on the first of these goals. And what we did not collect the texts we analyzed in the context of this project, but we borrowed, they lent us the text that had been collected in a previous project, the principal investigator being Liliana Tulczynski. And what we did was develop a pedagogical sequence of activities with a focus on content, lexical and formal features of analytical texts. And the students were asked in regular classes, they were asked to produce a total of 5 texts on different topics and discuss those topics after being exposed, after examining and co-evaluating. Also, the sequence was quite complex, so to say. And they became familiar with the form and the evaluation of these type of texts, right? And a total of almost 2,000 texts were collected, both in Spanish and Catalan, following the same prompts, the same instructions, and they wrote online and using a Google form in this case. Right. So we have already worked on this data, and one of the first publications, which is in press now, analyzes which are the predictors of text quality in this type of text. We started from the predictors that had been analyzed in previous literature, considering productivity measures, length of the text, etc., different measures of productivity, lexical indicators, syntactic, and discourse indicators too. Okay, we did not come up with them, but rather took them from previous literature. And the indicators we're concentrating today are discourse markers, discourse correlates, specifically discourse markers. calculated as a proportion out of the total number of clauses. Right. Oops. Right. We do know that and the increase in the use of discrete markers is affected by an increase in age as a function of age and also educational level. And but contrary to our expectations, as I advanced before, the use of these discrete markers was not dramatically affected by the implementation of the pedagogical sequence, even though it was specifically designed to pay attention to these forms as well, not only, but also to these forms. So we wanted to find an explanation for these, why, in spite of working on these forms, the pedagogical sequence does not make better texts in relation to the use of markers. And we consider several options to explain for this. One of them was trying to go beyond the conventional discourse markers, and this is what we do today partially, because we started our analysis from let's say, a closed repertoire of forms that had been identified, the classical discourse markers that had those lists we give our students to organize their texts. We started with those, and also analyzing syntactic connectivity at the level of sentence. But we soon realized that there was more to it, and that many big part of the organization of the test relies on bigger clauses, excuse me, sorry, bigger elements, clausal elements that are not traditionally considered discourse markers, right? Let's move on. So we took, for this specific project, we analyzed one of the texts, the one they produced at the end of, in the middle of the sequence, when they have worked specifically on a given topic. That was the last they wrote. That was what we call text 4 on a specific topic. And as I said, the procedure was the same one for all of them. And what we did with the text was transcribe them and code them using chat, from Childers, right? Okay. Oops, here, right. So this first objective was implied the identification of lexical forms, meaning conjunctions, intrasentential connectors, parenthetical, meaning traditional discourse markers, and lexical markers, which are, let's say, one of our main objectives, which was one of the outputs of the project. I'll show you in a minute. That as forms. As for discourse function, we consider these forms for forming propositional contents, relation established between them, structural organizing the text, unmodal markers, marking, so to say, the perspective, the implication of the writer in the text. I'll show you an example in a minute. Oops.
Elissa, you have about 5 more minutes. I'm sorry.
I think we're fine. Right. We actually tested how valid the instrument we developed was, and we performed the coding in the 20% of the text, and we got quite a nice correlation coefficient of reliability, 0.5. Right. So this is how it looks. This is how the instrument looks, so to say. And this is how, I'm not going to go in detail into this, because what we have here, these are the forms and the functions in Catalan. We kind of translated it for you. I mean, the translation is not necessarily the best one or it's not literal translation, but I mean, the idea is that you get an idea of what elements are we talking about. Right, so the categories would be for the propositional markers, the function is being propositional, conjunctions, parenthetical, and lexical. Conjunctions are just traditional conjunctions, markers of subordination and coordination. The parentheticals are our traditional discourse markers, and the lexical are those clausal markers that allow the speaker to take a stance. Let's say it could be added that, leaving aside that, it becomes apparent that. For instance, as for the structural, what they do is to analyze how the text is organized, etc. before we start, to conclude. Or finally, the modal are those that allow the speaker to take a stand. It should be emphasized, my impression is, according to somebody's opinion, etc. Right. These are the results we got, and they are organized forms, types and functions. These are the forms, the types. What we see here, what the graph illustrates, is that differences are to be found in the use of conjunctions and parenthetical markers, as far as form is concerned, remember. While the secondary students make a wider use of conjunctions, there seems to be a kind of trade-off effect by which the university students make a wider use, a more extensive use of parenthetical markers. But the lexical ones, the ones we identified for within the context of the project, they stay the same. There are no differences for those, right? Let me move on. However, if we look at the functions, if we consider that in terms of function, we see that in order to express relations at the propositional level, or in order to organize, structure the text, there are no differences between groups, age groups, but the differences arise when modal markers are concerned, when we talk about modal markers, which are, we were very happy about this result, I must say, which are the ones that allow the writer to express their stance, their perspective, the opinion on the topic they were discussing. Besides, and we have people from our research group working on that, Hugo Vilar and Liliana Tolchinsky, they're working on how these markers are also related to the use of evidence that allow the speaker to illustrate, exemplify this opinion, what they say by talking about examples, specific examples, and etc.
Elisa?
Yeah.
I see further research because we have to reach a conclusion, so I see you're getting to it, so please do.
I'm getting to it. So
very good.
The conclusion I'd say is that when we talk about connectivity, it's we realized it's definitely not enough to talk about forms or functions, but rather to consider them together. And we know that there's still a lot to do, and one of these things to do, one of these aspects to consider would be identifying non-canonical uses, and I'm sure you know what I mean. Meaning those cases in which our students, our writers use a given mark, a given connector, a given marker improperly, like not adequately, like used in a context which is not the right one, okay? And that becomes, that derives in the establishment of inadequate semantic relations or fallacies. They say what they don't want to say. And we are also expecting soon to be able to apply it to second language data, because we are certain that these markers are, let's say, at the crossroads between grammatical competence and discourse competence as the one you develop with age from a developmental perspective, right? And well, yeah, we definitely think that it might follow function, but we're not too sure that this is always the case, and that sometimes if not the other way around, but at least they go hand in hand. And yeah, that was it for today. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Elissa. You'll come out of the screen sharing. And I want to thank you very, very much because I have too many questions, but we have to move on. And I hope we'll have time for questions at the end because we're going to be a little bit tight for time. Our next presenter is Tanja Grdeček. I hope I'm saying this correctly, who along with Mira Varga from the University of Osijek in Croatia. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing all of these things correctly, but I'm getting close enough, I hope. Their presentation deals with non-human subjects and present perfect as mechanisms of rhetorical judgment in research papers. I have to admit, when I read the title, I didn't really know what that meant, but one of the reasons we take part in conferences is because we learn things we didn't know about. So Tanja, you will take screen sharing, and we look forward to your presentation.
Right, thank you, Jay, for introducing Mirna and I. So basically, it's some ideas of what I will present in our studies. Actually, the blend of the morphosyntactic type of input and the discourse markers type of input that also we've listened to previously within the academic writing, so the primary focus of our recent research, primarily Mirna's. So this particular study is also an offshoot of our earlier research on citation practices in linguistic research papers. We've covered both English and Croatian corpora, but we'll focus now on some of the issues that cropped up during our research, right? So when we were collecting data and analyzing our corpora, what turned out to be quite interesting and later supported by some other research and theoretical background is that there is a high increase of non-human subjects combined with the present perfective verbal structures, which we attributed to their rhetorical judgment function. So we focused primarily then on the English corpus, and we wanted to review, right, so also the research that had been done up to that point, and also to see how our findings correspond to the further perhaps findings that might support and give prompt to some further ideas, which I might say were primarily focused on what Mirna's primary point of research is, and this is epistemic modality and academic writing hedging in general, but with a slight blend of my interest in cognitive linguistic models, right? So, so what we want to point out is that for some time already, scholars have been interested in deciphering how writers deploy different citation patterns to meet different purposes in developing their argument, with their focus often being called on the suppression of the authorial visibility. So what we wanted to see is that typical exponents of the group of this suppression of author's visibility is in Highland's term the concept of abstract rhetorics, right? So we have expressions of probabilities, judgments, and speculations rather than certainty of knowledge, right? So these abstract rhetorics has been shown in our corpus and also in general reviews of this concept as inanimate subjects, right? So, and the example we have here is a typical exemplification of this phenomenon. So this example research has shown that the frequency of encounters with unknown words affect learning, shows that inanimate subjects such as research, study, etc., obscure the source of the claim, and thus rhetorically diminish the responsibility of the author for the claim itself. Also, what is interesting is that we have discourse verbs like suggest, indicate, which are opposed to the show, demonstrate, and find in a degree of level of commitment to the claim made. So we might assume in this sense that the background knowledge of a speaker is used to interpret the situation and is treated as a kind of evidence which underlines the speaker's epistemic evaluation of the strength of commitment. But we have inanimate subjects which diminish this influence, right, so of the commitment. So inanimate subjects propped up to be the interest of our research, and we found fools in many resources, and especially, let's say, in the Biber's grammar, right? So that the use of inanimate subjects in subject positions, accompanied by verbs of various semantic domains, is a typical feature of academic prose. A high frequency of inanimate subjects seems to be justified by that fact that the latter, right, so is more oriented to establishing the relational affairs among the inanimate entities rather than focusing on human agents, right, as doers of the action. So what Hyland also calls is the writer-oriented hedge, right, so where we have this reduced commitment to the claim. So in a way, what we've already claimed is that these serve to protect the writer from a possibly mistaken view or inference. So what we have also is a cluster, right, of these inanimate subjects, right, so where we have this objectification and objectiveness as the primary goal. So you have here some of the examples of these nominal structures: research, study, recent work, framework, analysis, theories, discussion, accounts, evidence. So we have here the process of the so-called impersonalization, right? So the process whereby the identity of the agent, okay, which is usually the researcher or the author, becomes obscured, resulting in an increase in author anonymity. So which is the striving force more recently in academic writing. So what we also, however, discovered is that the combination of these inanimate subjects, right, so is increasingly combined with the use of present perfective, right, so as the verbal structure. And our research question was actually to establish whether the use of a specific verb tense and aspect structure contributes to the concept of objectification and impersonalization of academic writing. So the aims of the study were to focus on structures with non-human subjects and verbs in present perfect in order to check whether they create a clearly entrenched hedging construction with the function of rhetorical judgment about the relevance of time to the concept of generality of claims made in the research papers, right? So we wanted to establish the relationship of the effect that present perfect has in terms of the time consequence, right, so to the present time, and how the distribution of this combination of inanimate subjects, non-human subjects with present perfect is distributed in the IMRAD sections of our research papers in the corpus. So the study itself covers the corpus of 20 research articles from the journal Studies in Second Language Acquisition within the publication years of 2015 and 2016. This is the total word count, and the present perfect forms of verbs were counted according to their identificational markers in grammar text. That means with the auxiliary verbs has and have. And both of these singular and plural forms were covered with a special focus on the distribution of these subject structures, so that we have this kind of distribution, non-human agentive subjects, right? So the focus of our research. Non-human passive structures also turned out to be quite frequent, and human subjects as well, where we may compare, right? So these, the first and the third group, right? So non-human agentive and human agentive subjects. These are row frequencies are distributed according to the IMRET structure, and you can see clearly that we have obvious clustering, right, of non-human agentive subjects in the introduction and discussion section, which indicates a tendency towards their hedging rhetorical function, right? So when they focus in the introduction and discussion, we have this hedging, distancing from the data established and in these sections. So this is obviously most obvious in the introduction section, where previous research has to be addressed in order to set the scene for the research presented in the article itself, in the method section, and then of course later on in the discussion section. Now, when we observe the distribution of tenses, which include in this case both non-human and human subjects, it's obvious that grammatical context, right? So for the claims that are presented in research papers are also quite important, right? So because in this distribution of tenses, it's obvious that past simple forms, right? So the verb forms in past simple are most frequent, right? So where we have, of course, the clear representation of the past research, and then we have the high frequency of present perfect structures. Present simple also is combined with present perfect in the distribution of previous research, and past perfect is the least frequent. So in view of the role, right, so that tenses play in forming the grammatical context, it has been established that morphosyntactic structure contributes greatly to the rhetorical function, and the reliability, right, so the hedging degree of argument is also highly dependent on the morphosyntactic structure, in this case of the verb form. Hinkel also noted that the problem in general terms is that instructional text dealing with academic writing, with the meaning and functions and uses of various discourse markers is slightly apart, right? So sometimes even rigidly apart from the use of various English tenses or voice use, and are not addressed, right, so to such a high detail or degree. So as we've mentioned earlier, the paradigmatic usage of tense in formal academic writing is relatively rigidly conventionalized, and thus taken for granted sometimes. And that's why we wanted to check how actually these structures combined with non-human nominal structures actually affect, right, so the rhetorical functions of particular sections in the IMRA structure of the research paper. So I will show you a few of the examples, right, so across the particular sections in order to illustrate what our results are and particular findings. So this is the first section, the introduction section, with a few of the examples. Typically after the sentence with a non-human and especially human subject, we would have a non-integral type of citation. So that's a kind of an example in the third one. But the most frequent types that we've accounted were in the type of, in the example one, where we have human subject, right? So with agentive force combined with the present perfective structure, right? So the second one also is an example of this one in a passive voice. This is the introduction. So these are the most frequent and typical structures in the introduction methodology section does not show such a high frequency. Actually, this is the least prominent section with these examples. Still, some of these examples here show that there is a strict structural cohesion, in this case of non-human subjects with present perfect. With the result section, we have similar examples as in the methodology section. Results are strictly related to the findings, so mostly we find past simple structures, past simple forms, whereas in the discussion and conclusion section, we have the also clustering of these typical examples with non-human subjects and present perfect. These are some of the examples. We also have some examples with the passive structures and with human subjects, human authors as prominent subjects.
Anya, you
yes.
have approximately 5 more minutes, so that's
yes,
out
okay.
questions.
I will
so
go
fine.
through some of the
use the time as you see fit.
Yes, okay, thank you. So some of the most important features that we've discovered is that with the present perfective, we don't have too many temporal adverbials which would emphasize the reference to the present time resultative effect. They are highly infrequent, quietly. So we have the established construction which does not have to include the time adverbial in order to emphasize the present time reference, right? So of the present perfective. Also, what is interesting is that as we've claimed, present perfect focuses on generalizations of the reviewed topics, followed by the past simple or the present simple, depending on whether writers would like to report the procedures of the past literature or to draw conclusion about the review of reviewed past literature. So these examples show you, right? So we have first the introductory part of the non-human subject with present perfect, and then we continue with present simple or past simple. So present perfect in this sense may be viewed in cognitive linguistic terms as a so-called anchoring device. It establishes a strong link to the reference point, right? So it's actually the time span that is simultaneous to actual space. We have here metaphorization, and we have this current relevance of the event. So in Langacker terms, right? So we call this also, and it's called a bounded space, okay? It allows for an objective observation. So as if we stopped and observed, right? So a suspended event, which is otherwise perceived as dynamic. So this allows, right? So the reader to evaluate the research done so far. Non-human agentative subjects also may be observed as nominalized counterparts of this verbal root. And in this cognitive linguistic view, Langacker's view, they also create a bounded space, providing a firm, we would call it a gestalt-like framework, within which reports of previous research may be neutrally and objectively assessed. So as a conclusion, right, so at this point, which we will hopefully elaborate in our written version, is that the type of the tense used in research papers largely depends on the type of the discourse and the structure of research article, right, so according to the IMRA structure. And clustering of non-human agentive subjects in combination with present perfect in the introduction and discussion section indicates its strong constructional potency with the function of hedging, right, in reference to previous research and with the aim of setting the scene for the work presented. So in view of the pedagogical implications, we see it as an attempt to draw attention of students to their distribution across the image structure and providing clear guidelines as to how and what to write at a specific point in their research paper. So that would be that for now. Thank you.
Tanya, thank you very, very much. We're getting very close to the end of our time. Ray Boxman he wrote here that often we write research has shown. He says he teaches this sort of form for literature survey in order to indicate the state of the research. You know, that many researchers have produced a finding rather than as a dodge for taking responsibility, which I find, I suppose many of us have encountered that sort of situation. I would add also from a personal perspective that I am out of my field here, but when people were taught academic writing, they were often taught it's objective, it's not subjective. You shouldn't be subjective. I think today we've seen a large movement toward more subjectivity in writing, but perhaps the research has not caught up with that yet in terms of how that gets dealt with. As I say, I'm out of my field here when I bring that up, so I may be totally wrong. But I think what we saw here is that the frameworks that are being dealt with are being actually analyzed very closely to see where this is moving. And I want to thank both of you very, very much for your presentations. I really did learn a number of things here. I'm sorry that we don't have time for more. You're now going to move to the fun break, which I hope will really be fun for you. I know that Tanya and Alyssa would want to take a breath and drink some water, so I don't know how fun that's going to be at the moment. But thank you very, very much, all of you, for participating. And if there are questions, I'm sure there will be an opportunity for more of this as time goes on. So thank you. I'm sorry I didn't get to questions, but at least each one of you had an opportunity for giving a full presentation, which I think is very important. Thank you, and to be continued in a research paper, probably.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.